Speaker, I wish my constituents back home in the 21st Congressional District and Americans throughout the country a very happy new year, and may it bring us good tidings and health. And may the Congress come together to solve some of the critical problems that we are facing our nation. We know that 83 years ago, the first Social Security check went out, beginning as a promise for future generations of America. It was an attempt to create a safety net, and it has. Social Security is the major source of income for the majority of people over the age of 65. That accounts for over 70 million Americans. In my 21st Congressional District, located in California's San Joaquin Valley, nearly 88,000 people depend upon this program for their basic needs, for food, for rent, for groceries. And it's critical, therefore, that we address the issues involving Social Security. A lot has changed in our country since it was first enacted in the 1930s during the Depression. And Americans today, those who are receiving and those who hope to receive Social Security, fear that the future of this vital program and their benefits are at risk, and they should be. Why? Well, the long-term financial integrity of Social Security is not sustainable, and therefore we have to fix it. But instead of fixing Social Security, many of my extreme MAGA Republicans are focused on gutting the program and cutting vital benefits. That's wrong. Under the leadership of my good friend, Congressman John Larson, the House Democrats have put forth a plan of action to secure and expand the benefits of Social Security. The Social Security Act of 2100 is a sacred trust act that permanently improves Social Security's long-term health by extending the trust's funds solvency, critical, without any increase in taxes on the middle class. Let me repeat that, without any increase in taxes on the middle class. It also repeals the bureaucratic rules like the windfall elimination provisions and the government pension offset that prevent law enforcement officers, firefighters, and their families from receiving full benefits. They should receive full benefits. That's why I'm a proud co-sponsor of this bill, because Congress must uphold its promise to all seniors so that they can retire with respect and dignity. What are we talking about? We're talking about America's safety net. American seniors and future generations deserve better. We owe it to them, who have spent their entire lives contributing to make our country a better place to live, and who are counting on Social Security in their golden years. Our country needs a roadmap to protect Social Security for generations to come, and this bill will do just that. I remain committed to upholding this sacred trust that was made many years ago, working together with Republicans and Democrats for all Americans to fix the solvency of our Social Security system. Let me also indicate that much has been said about the challenges we face at the border and immigration in America. We must fix this broken immigration system. We had an opportunity in 2013, and Republicans and Democrats must come together to protect our border, to protect it from human trafficking, from the movement of illicit drugs. And common sense action, I believe we can come together to do this. And I will continue to work with my colleagues so that we can fix our broken immigration system and secure our border. That is what needs to be done. I yield back the balance of my time.
Now we'll begin with the questioning. You know, at hearings like this, experts throw out a lot of numbers, and I look at the world a little bit differently than some of our conservative economists in terms of what's happening to working families. But at the end of the day, you got millions and millions of people who have worked their whole lives are entering retirement and they're scared to death. And I think, Ms. Chambers, your testimony was extremely moving because I think you're not just speaking about your own life, or not even about the UAW and union members. You're talking about millions and millions of people. Talk a little bit, not only for your own experience, from your friends, your family, what it's like to have worked, in your case, 17 years for one of the major corporations in America, and as I understand it right now, you have no retirement program, no pension program. On an emotional basis, on a personal basis, what is that like?
So, yeah, we have a 401k, and we got a raise in our 401k, and it's great. It's a good stepping stone. It's a good foot forward. But when I retire, my 401k is based off, and the rest of America now that's in my generation, is based off of what the stock market's doing. I've seen several times in my lifetime where the stock markets went down, and we've lost a lot of money in our 401k. I'm not at retirement age, but when I look at my 401k and the amount of money that was bleeding out of it with the COVID, it makes me very uneasy. It kind of feels like, especially working at Ford. I had a goal post when I first hired in, and then it was, well, you're a temporary employee full-time until further notice. So then now I'm...
Explain to members what being a quote-unquote temporary, you were a temporary employee for 6 years, right?
Yep.
It's a long
Yes.
temp. What does
Yes.
that mean?
So I was considered full-time, so I worked 40, 50, 60 hours a week, but I was locked in at $14 an hour until 2013. And I was expected to do everything a full-time employee did, but I didn't get any of the benefits. And that actually, when I hired in, I questioned what parts of the contract I fell under, and they said, it depends on what we're talking about. So there was never any full, like, here's their book, this is your rules and regulations. It's like, no, we're not going to cover you under that.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Ms. Ghilarducci, we are, in one sense, the wealthiest country in the history of the world, right? Yeah. A lot of billionaires out there doing very, very well. How does, in your judgment, the American retirement plan, the status of older Americans compared to people around other wealthy nations?
Yeah,
Microphone.
my data really looks at that question. So I compare what people were like when they were approaching retirement 30 years ago, and then take the same snapshot of the generation that looks like them right now. And as I said in my written testimony today, 50% will not be able to meet their retirement standards, and most of them won't be able to meet poverty standard. Compare that to other countries with all different kinds of systems, the Scandinavians, the Germans, the French, even the Italians. Just look at our peers, and we fall way behind. I was looking at the elderly poverty rates. Kazakhstan does better than us. So there's a couple of design issues.
I heard from some of the economists here today that we're doing just great. Things are getting better. Is that
Yeah, so that was my little lesson on averages versus medians. Because the rich have done so well, they have brought up those averages that people who talk about average retirement wealth can point to. It's gone up. But that's because the top 10% got the benefit of retirement tax cuts. They got the benefit of the run-up in the market. They didn't take money out, to buy their houses.
Okay, last question. Thank you very much. Sorry. Mr. Doonan, right now, billionaire pays Social Security taxes on $168,000. That's about it. Massive amounts of untaxed money there despite massive income and wealth inequality. That makes sense to you?
Thank you for the question.
Microphone.
Thank you for the question. I would note that one of the reasons Social Security's financing fell off track is we used to capture 90% of total income, and that was sort of expected to continue. But with rising inequality, I think we're down to about 82 or 81. So, when these projections were done in the early 80s, I feel like they did a pretty nice job. We had 40 years of level costs. But there are some areas where the projections just didn't come true.
Senator Cassidy?
This is all a scam. I mean, we got people that's getting ready to retire that's going to try to live off $2,000 to $3,000. Impossible. It's impossible. Because what happens, it comes up here, we spend it. We're $35 trillion in debt. We don't have any money. We're dead broke. And then taxpayers have $2 trillion in credit card debt. We are in huge trouble. In this body, we had better start figuring that out, because we're going to have a run on this city here soon, and there's going to be about 150 million people coming up here saying, where's our damn money that we paid in? I could have put my Social Security money, 40 years, in tax, in the market, and probably be worth 8 to 10 million today. But the federal government wasted it. So I'll get off my horse there. But it's good that we have this, because we got, you know, I get a little pension check from education. I was part of a union. It's not going to help people. People are going to have to work, continue to work longer and longer. Am I right, Ms. Gender? Can you say something about Social Security and it being taxed for some reason? We're taxing people for the second time on Social Security that they put into an account.
Yeah, and I'd like to point out when Social Security was first founded, those who established it, it was started out as a 2% tax, and they said this will never take more than 6% of your income. Today it takes 12.4%, and depending on whether you go with CBO or Social Security trustees, it needs to take between 15.8 and 17.5%. So we're talking about thousands of dollars more per year. It also was actually only originally recommended that the tax be up to $66,000, equivalent in today's dollars of earnings. But over time, it has expanded massively, and the money has been spent every year. So whereas everybody thinks this money's been set aside for me, no, for the past 13 years, every dollar that has gone out of workers' paychecks has gone immediately to pay promised benefits. And that's what happens when you have a system that enables those in charge of it to spend the money in the immediate term and leave the buck to the next generation that's coming along. And because Social Security has grown so much, it's actually to the detriment of lower income workers in particular, who have to pay such a large share of their paycheck to Social Security. They have little left to save for retirement. And then lower income and African American workers have the lowest life expectancies. So they are the most likely to get nothing back in return. 1 out of 4 African American men will die between the ages of 45 and 64 after having paid into this system for decades, tens if not hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they might get nothing back.
What's the solution?
I think we ultimately have to shift towards a universal benefit system. That's what true social insurance is. It does not make sense that we are paying the biggest benefits to the highest income earners. So gradually over time, I think we need to bend down the benefits for the middle and upper income earners, actually increase them for the lower income earners, look at things like indexing retirement age to life expectancy, more accurate inflation index, and I think that workers need an option to have their money in something that actually earns a positive rate of return and that can't just immediately be spent by Congress.
I have a 28 and 29-year-old, 2 boys, got a job, working hard, paying Social Security. They ask me all the time, Dad, will I ever see any of that money? Will they see it?
I think they will see some of it. That's the exact same thing I hear whenever I ask a group of younger workers, and none of them raises their hand. So I think that there will be something there, but it's not going to be what has been promised.
Mr. Stevens, you got anything to add to that?
Thank you, Senator. What I would add is when we talk about Social Security or we talk about pensions, the two things that they both have in common is that guaranteed income. You know what you're going to get, generally speaking, at the end of it. What I reference in terms of protected retirement, we have developed now solutions that get at both of those in a very efficient way, and they also address the issue around market volatility because we have step-ups and lock-ins, and it's a very efficient way to deliver that to millions of Americans that we've been talking, and that's all because of what you all did around Secure Act 1.0 and 2.0. They have put us in a position to do that, and that's why I'm really encouraging us to have every 401k plan, 457 plan, 403b plan at least one of those solutions so that the American workers can choose. If they want to know what they're going to get in retirement, we can deliver that for them.
Young people of all ages ask me, why can't we put our money in our own 401k instead of putting it in Social Security? Is there an answer to that?
I think what I love is that they're asking the right question. Savings in any way is a good thing, and I think there's a place for Social Security, there's a place for pensions, and there's certainly a place for what we're doing in 401k plans.
Thank you.
Senator Hassan.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. McNeely, are you aware that in April of 2023, OMB issued guidance that called for increased, quote, meaningful in-person work?
I am.
So why has the Social Security Administration failed to provide any timeline for employees to return to the office?
Thank you for the question. So from a timeline perspective, our political leadership was back in the office in December of 2021. I think it's also important to note that in April of 2022, 75% of our workforce, our frontline workforce, which takes care of hearings, takes care of the field offices, they were also in on April of 2022. And right now, we are in the process of increasing headquarters and support staff in our headquarters offices.
So your response to the committee on September 14th failed to provide a response on how the agency plans to return to in-person work. And in fact, the only substantive answer was regarding the Social Security Administration's plans to adjust its real estate footprint. So I think it's very important if you're going to have a call for increased meaningful in-person work, then we need to understand that timeline and actually be able to fulfill it. So the Social Security Administration made an agreement that allows probationary employees with minor disciplinary actions and trainees to telework. Hold on, I'm not done. Like think about that. Employees who are on probation, who have minor disciplinary actions and trainees, they're allowed to telework. So wouldn't it make more sense for these workers under probation or who have had these disciplinary actions or trainees to work in the office to ensure improvement or to monitor their behavior?
So there is the authority to grant telework in those particular cases. What I would tell you is what we learned coming out of the pandemic is that our front office workers, specifically the trainees that you're talking about, they did not feel connected to the mission, and they did not feel connected to the teams that they were working with. So
it took a pandemic to realize that you can't train someone from home, that they need to be in person and connected to the team to actually learn how to do their job?
Well, no, that was the feedback that we got from them. And so when we had the opportunity to participate in a approach to get those individuals into the office so that they could work together, that's something that we do on a regular basis.
Well, it's unfortunate that you even had to experiment with that and receive that feedback to understand that someone isn't going to train well from home for a brand new position. Anyway, getting back to the Social Security Administration, do you know how many applications are currently on backlog?
What types of applications are you referring to?
So all sorts of applications that you have here in the administration. For instance, at the beginning of this year, the Social Security Administration reported that there were approximately 700,000 applications in the backlog. For reference, in January of 2020, there were only 41,000. Now, this has resulted in several of my constituents receiving unsatisfactory customer service to receive the benefits that they have worked for their entire lives. In fact, 3 out of 5 applicants who are applying for their Social Security benefits, 3 out of 5 applicants will be denied benefits after waiting for approximately 7 months. About 8,000 people file for bankruptcy, and approximately 10,000 people die each year while awaiting a decision from your agency. All the while, you all are allowing delinquent employees to sit on their sofas at home instead of actually getting to work and doing their jobs. This is absolutely unacceptable.
So our employees are working whether they are in the office or at home, and they are.
Are you monitoring the work that they are doing from home on a regular basis?
Yes, we are.
Every employee, do you have the numbers of the hours that are submitted? Are you counting how many times they're logging into their computers and responding to casework?
So our employees are subject to the same performance management processes and oversight they are whether they're teleworking or working in an office. And we have systems in place that our managers use to schedule, assign, and track workloads. And that includes individual employee workloads in many cases. So real-time understanding of what actions are being processed at any particular given time. Additionally, our employees are required to be accessible to their supervisors, clients, colleagues, and external parties during work hours via a variety of means, including instant messaging, video platforms, and telephone. They are connected to the workplace, whether they are in the office or at the home.
Then why is the backlogs for Social Security applicants increased from 41,000 to 107,000?
Because we've been historically underfunded for a number of years now.
I don't think you're underfunded. You're funded at the Nancy Pelosi levels. At the Democrat levels, we just continued that same funding.
So I would say
at pandemic level spending.
So I would say we have an increase of over 8 million beneficiaries over the last 10 years. At the same time, we experienced our lowest work staffing levels at the end of FY22. That's a math problem. I mean, that is a problem. If you have those workloads, increasing, and you don't have the staff to take care of those workloads, you're going to have the backlogs that you're talking about, Representative.
Well, I would love to hear more reports of your staff actually working in person and increase the meaningful in-person work that is done in your offices. I'm out of time, and I yield.
Gentlewoman yields back her time. The gentleman, my friend,
Senator Scott.
Mr. Caprita, I mentioned in my opening comments, and I think the chairman agrees that this has to be done in a bipartisan fashion and with a whole range of options on the table. Too often Democrats claim that Republicans want to cut Medicare every time we put or mention the troubles facing the program. So, Mr. Caprita, Democrats have a record of proposing and enacting Medicare cuts. I've already mentioned some in my statement. I'd like to have you elaborate if you agree with my statement.
Well, both parties, I would say, have sometimes put Medicare changes on the table. They have reduced spending. You can call them cuts, of course. And, in the Affordable Care Act, there was a very substantial change in, particularly for inpatient hospital services, something called a productivity adjustment factor, which is still in place and permanent and has a very large cumulative effect on spending. So I think many people view it as a good thing because it's brought down hospital spending quite a bit. The question is it sustainable over the long run? We're relying very heavily on it to keep the numbers down, but the actuaries are always warning that it might be overdone.
Under Medicare for All, Mr. Caprita, what happens to provider reimbursement rates and how would that affect care, particularly in rural America?
Well, Medicare for All, I think, needs to be viewed through a political economy lens. How does it get managed over time? And it's very easy to, when you're facing a budget crunch, just to pay people less. And of course, when you pay providers less, eventually there's supply changes. That means fewer providers actually provide the services at the lower rates. That's how you end up with queuing problems. So I do think that our multi-payer system, much as we dislike many aspects of it, keeps open revenue streams that makes it so that providers are not dependent on any one player to make sure they can serve patients. And so I think we shouldn't move away from that.
We always hear this business about raising taxes on the rich. During President Obama's tenure, rich was arbitrarily defined at $200,000. So as part of Obamacare, Democrats enacted 3 8/10% net investment tax at these thresholds, but didn't index them, knowing it would eventually hit middle-income taxpayers. Since this enactment, the number of taxpayers hit by this money grab have more than doubled from 3 million to 7 million. Now they're proposing to quadruple the tax and claim it'll only apply to 2% of the taxpayers. So you can understand why I'm skeptical about that statement. Mr. Caprita, much like 3 8/10% tax enacted on Obamacare, wouldn't the number of taxpayers affected by this supercharged tax increase over time, capturing more than 2% of the taxpayers?
If you don't index the income threshold upon which a tax is applied, over time, the the real value of those thresholds, of course, erode due to inflation. So we've had bracket creep in the past in our tax system, and sometimes it's sustainable and sometimes not, depending on what's going on. There usually is eventually some pushback on it.
Yeah. President Biden's Medicare proposal and President Obama's Affordable Care Act both doubled counted Medicare revenue. So, Mr. Capretta, these are obviously underhanded gimmicks in the budget. How does this impact federal deficits and debt?
Well, I do think this is an underreported phenomenon, which is when you include on the PAYGO scorecard Medicare savings and HI in particular, you can end up double counting it. It can make the solvency of Medicare improve, which allows higher payments for Medicare down the road, and it also could be used to finance another bill, through the PAYGO scorecard. So I think what we should try to avoid when we're working on Medicare solvency is taking credit for it on both sides of the budget. Especially, a lot of times it's not big enough to make a real big difference, but Medicare's big. And so when you put a lot more money into Medicare and then also claim you can spend it under PAYGO for something else, that's when you end up with a problem.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Grassley. Senator Padilla, followed by Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Romney, thank you for
so
joining
much.
us.
It's impressive to listen to Senator Manchin. He said a lot. I hope we listened carefully to what he had to say, with which I fully agree.
Social Security cuts, no commission to cut Social Security.
How about to raise taxes? 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 How about to raise taxes for Social Security? You against that too?
Is he on your staff? What staff are you on?
I think our gentleman, I think the gentleman will be, I got it.
No Social Security cuts. We don't need a smoky back room to cut Social Security benefits. No.
We'll just suspend, folks.
Hi, Senator. How are you?
He knows you.
He shows up regularly.
Yeah. Well, let's just say goodbye to our friend who wants to do nothing and leave Social Security beneficiaries with a 20% cut as a result of our inaction.
May I just interject, Mr.
Please.
Chairman? Senator Romney, it must be refreshing to know that you still animate some folks on the left as well. So
Exactly right. Exactly.
it must be reassuring for you.
Exactly right. Well, I'm actually here to announce our candidacy for.
Senator Romney, thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, ranking member. Appreciate the chance to be
Continue.
with you and the members of this committee. Let me underscore what Senator Manchin has said about the urgency of us addressing our shortfall, our fiscal crisis. I'm going to start with 3 reasons that this is something we need to do and do now. One relates to interest. And I'm going to get there by showing you, as a percentage of the economy, what's happened to defense spending, which is the solid line, and domestic discretionary spending, which is the yellow line, and where the CBO projects them to go over time. As you'll note, our spending on discretionary items has come down, both for the military as a percentage of the GDP, both for the military and for the discretionary domestic spending. But because of baby boomers, what's going to happen on Medicare and Social Security is a very different pattern. Social Security is the orange line there, and Medicare is the blue line. You'll see that Medicare over the next, by the way, this first dotted line is current, 2023. The dotted line over here is 2030, which would be 6 years from now, the end of the next group of senators' term. So as you'll see, the pretty dramatic increase, and you'll also note that we haven't yet layered on interest. If we now turn to adding the interest line, here is the interest line. The red line is interest, and you'll note that as of 2030, only 6 years from now, interest expense for the federal government will exceed either defense spending or domestic discretionary spending. That's where we're headed. So we're going to have to do massively awful things, either in defense or domestic spending. This is a huge increase. That's one reason we need to move soon. So unless we fix the fiscal calamity, we're no longer going to be able to have a military leadership in the world, and we would have major consequences for our safety and our national security. There's a second reason. Our mounting debt is placing us in the same hazardous category as Greece and Italy. This shows government debt, gross debt, and by the way, debt held by the public, as a percentage of GDP out through 2028. Ours is the red line. Here's Greece, Italy, Portugal, Ireland, Spain. Notice they're all getting better. We're the one getting worse. And we are now in a category as of 2028 where we're going to have more debt as a percentage of our GDP than Italy. And remember what Greece and Italy and the others went through. This is the trajectory we're on unless we take action soon. Simpson-Bowles told us about this crisis, but it's already here. And our legislation has a built-in path to avoid some of the challenges that were associated with the Simpson-Bowles failure to actually reach a conclusion. Let me just mention what they are. First of all, four corners appoint the members of this commission. Three will be from members, elected members, and then one will be an expert, but the expert will not be voting. Only members will be voting on the commission's recommendations. The objective of the commission is to stabilize debt as a share of the GDP. It doesn't talk about any particular program. It just says let's get our debt as a percentage of the GDP at a stable level. And finally, all spending is being considered and everything's on the table. We don't say this program has to be added, that program. No, it's everything is on the table. And finally, if there's a bipartisan consensus, if we have Republicans and Democrats on this commission that vote together on a bipartisan basis to proceed, then there is a privileged process to take the legislation to the floor and to vote on it in the House and the Senate. In the Senate, by the way, the 20-vote rule would apply. So it's the same numbers required in order for it to become law. And of course, the president would then be given the opportunity to sign it. If we don't fix this mess that our country is in, why it's hard for me to imagine a circumstance where America is able to continue to lead the world. If we're spending more on interest than we're spending on defense, then how in the world are we going to keep up with China, which is already spending a lot more on procurement than we are today? So this is a decision we have. We're either going to be known as a generation that took on tough challenges and solved them, or one that didn't. We all lived in the shadow of the greatest generation. If we don't fix this problem, we're going to be known as the worst generation. Our children, our grandchildren depend on us taking action, and everything's on the table. And I'll just mention one thing, and that is when Bill Clinton was president, he looked to see what Republicans and Democrats could do together. Each came together and found an equal amount of tax increases, revenue increases, and spending cuts, and got a deal done and got us on track and actually got a balanced budget. This is something we can do, but only if we do it on a bipartisan basis. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member.
I think both.